Hi, welcome to the workshop. Watch and see how I make this simple wood puzzle. You're watching the long video here, and it has, I think, all the marking out, virtually all of the sawing and chopping of the joints, and it takes a long time. So if you want to watch it in quick action, pop over and see the short version. But if you want to make one yourself, then follow along with me. So one of the first things to do is to get 3 components that are all the same size. Actually, the length doesn't matter, but the width and thickness do. I'm preparing 3 that are exactly the same length, and you may notice that I've planed up the original long piece so its thickness and width is exactly the same, and then I just chop that up into 3 pieces. So now watch carefully, and you'll see how the proportion of the different pieces works together to make the puzzle work. First of all, I need to find the center point, mark that on every piece. I'll just put a short center line in with a knife, just to make it a bit more obvious. You see, I struggled to actually find where I'd marked it there with the calipers. So now I take the width, half that, and then I'll mark that onto each piece. And because it's awkward to drag these along and get a nice accurate line, I'm marking a point at each end, and then I'll just take the square and join those together. There's not enough end on these pieces to use the stock of the square to get a nice line down the center, so I'm just aligning both of the points that I made with the calipers. Could always use a marking gauge set to the same width. Now I'm just marking half the thickness on the ends, and that helps me to align the pieces in the next step. And I can mark the thickness of the component centrally on the other one, set a marking gauge, and then put lines in on each side to give me the size of the mortise that I need. You can tell where I'm pausing a little bit here. I'm having to think about how the thing goes together and how to make it. I should have done a bit more homework, I think. But it is, when you come to make it yourself, if you can try and understand the way it works, it makes the layout an awful lot more simple, a lot more intuitive. So I'm marking now the length of the width of the components for that central mortise, so that one can pass through the other. And so that's the first part of the puzzle completed. I'll show you a close-up of all of them a little bit later. Let's move on to the second part. So this one needs the same sort of mortise marked in, so I can use the gauge, still set the same. And the third one will also need those lines in, so I'll do those at this point as well. And I also want the point to, what am I talking about? I also want the length to be the same, so I can mark that from one end using the gauge again, taking it off the first component. Just thinking in my mind, which one do I need to mark it on? And I'm looking at another puzzle that I've made in the past there. So this is where I need it. So one end is marked the same as the mortise for part 1. And at the other end, so at the moment it's looking like the first part of the puzzle. As I say, I'll show you close-ups of these a little bit later. See, I really am getting confused, aren't I? Anyway, we've lined this up the other way round, because this one's got to slide sideways into this piece. So we want that thickness marked off on the mortise. And that's marked from the centre line I put in at the beginning. And that makes one end of the opening. And then the other end of the opening. And that concludes part 2 of the puzzle. So let's move on to part 3, and it's probably the more complicated one of all of them. That wants an end on the mortise at the same point as on the other pieces. I'll knife that one in. It's already got the long sides of the mortise marked in. I did that a little bit earlier, as you saw. Now I set the gauge off the one piece, mark it on the second piece. That gives me again the opening on here. There we go. By the way, if you watch the short version of this video, there's a chance for you to win this double cross that I'm making, and depending on how many views it has, I'll be making additional ones. I think I said for every 10,000 views I'll make another cross and give it away to somebody who's shared the video. All the instructions for that are actually in the short video, so check that one out. So that's part 3, and here are some close-ups. Hopefully make it a little bit clearer for you. So all I have to do now is cut those out. can see over there in the top right hand corner the other double cross that I made a few years ago now. I don't know why I didn't video it at the time. It may actually have been before I started YouTube. But I saw it the other day and I thought I will do a video on that. So that's why I've done this one. So I've done all the sawing that's possible to do to help get out the waste. Now it's just a case of paring away where I can, where I've put saw lines in, saw cuts in, and then there'll be a bit of chopping later on for the mortise. I suddenly realised that I could get a more appropriately sized chisel for this. You may notice I'm using these footprint bevel edge chisels. It's a lovely set that I've got. Unfortunately they no longer make them, but if you spot any of these second hand, I certainly recommend that you pick them up, because they really are excellent. The steel is superb, takes a lovely edge. With small parts like this, you have to be quite delicate when you're chopping. So easy to split the wood. I've got the support of the vise here, which stops the wood from splitting, but I'm also taking it gently because if you chop anything in the vise, it's not great for the vise screw, so don't go whacking it too hard. I marked for this mortise on the opposite face, so I'll flip it over in a moment and work from the other side. Now, believe it or not, at this point I managed to not have the microphone on, so you can't hear anything. But basically what I'm doing is beveling all the edges, just to make sure we don't get any splinters, make it feel a little bit nicer. For the short video, I refilmed this very slightly, just taking a stroke off each side, and well, you can see it here, just to show what I was doing, with a bit of sound. Anyway, after that we'll try and put it together. So congratulations and many thanks to any of you who stayed the course and watched the whole of that video. I hope you'll go and make one for yourself. Cheerio.